Well, the Cavaliers are going to get their shot once again, this time at home in 2019 to conclude the season in the annual showdown as the schedule was just released. Is there anything in particular that jumps out to you? I know we had a conversation before we hit the record button that's centered around that half of the fan base that says, wow, I kind of like this schedule in regards to maybe making us look a little bit better than we are, puffing up some wins and puffing up the record. But at the same time, hey, if you're going to the games, you'd like to see somebody on the other side that brings a bit of a brand name.
Yeah, this schedule, and I'm looking at it right now, the road games are the big games. They open at Boston College, they go to Miami, they go to Notre Dame, they go to Virginia, as you said. By the way, 317 days from today, they play against Virginia. The reason I know that was because after last night's basketball game, I had to figure out how long before the Hokies had a chance to win against Virginia again, and it was 318 yesterday. Anyway, and then you've got the game against Georgia Tech, which maybe not a marquee game, but that's been that one that's under the Justin Fuente era. They've struggled. They have yet to beat Georgia Tech. So those are all the road games. And then you look at the home schedule: Old Dominion, Furman, Duke, Rhode Island, that juggernaut, Rhode Island, North Carolina, Wake Forest. Pitt is your marquee game on that home slate. It just doesn't inspire the need to be a season ticket holder. And I realize there's not much Virginia Tech can do about that ACC scheduling, but oh, man, it looks good from a win-loss perspective, but from games at Lane Stadium, you're going to sleep through a lot of these.
Paul, my daughter attends the University of Rhode Island, so let's back off here a little bit here now.
What was their record last year?
Well, I will tell you this. She's been there for 2 years. Yeah. I went out for Parents' Weekend this past fall, and there was a drop or two in the air, so we decided, she didn't want to go to the game. She hasn't been to a football game in 2 years there, so she can't even make it 200 feet to the stadium. So that's.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'll make you a deal. We always have tickets for the game. If you and her want to come, I'll set aside a pair of tickets for you. You can come to that Rhode Island game.
Woo-wee. It's quite an offer.
Well, hey, that's what we do. That's what we do. Yeah.
I appreciate that. Well, Paul, I got to say that when I look at any team's schedule, I look for two things right off the bat. Number one would be, who do you play out of conference? And number two would be, okay, this is obviously an ACC team. We know the format of the schedule is that you play everyone in your division. You play two teams in the other division, that there's a rival that's designated for every team. That makes sense in some instances, i.e. Miami and Florida State. It makes no sense to me concerning Virginia Tech and Boston College. Why they have to play every year, I have no idea. Why you can't keep the traditional rivals intact. Sure, North Carolina and North Carolina State should play every year. Miami, Florida State. You don't need to do that with everyone. And I've worked out the scheduling, and you don't need to hear me on my soapbox, but I've cut videos detailing how the schedule should be approached. But it's Boston College outside of the Coastal Division, and it's Wake Forest. So it's a pretty light touch for the Hokies there. And it's the game at Notre Dame, and then it's a bunch of games that they should win, although we know what happens with Virginia Tech and maybe some games that they should win out of conference against the likes of Old Dominion.
Yeah, and it's funny because we were joking around about that, and I kept bringing up the fact that you've got that Old Dominion game, and in reality, that should be a beatdown for Virginia Tech, but it should have been a beatdown this year over in Hampton, and it wasn't. And so they're going to have to figure out a few things. The one that, again, really kind of jumps out at me is they got to go on the road to take on Georgia Tech. And I realize it's going to be a different look to Georgia Tech, but that's still a school that has had success against Virginia Tech. And, if I'm a fan, that's one I'm circling. The one thing that kind of bums me out for the Hokies this year is we don't have a home night at Lane Stadium on a Thursday night. And that is a tradition around here that people really, really get excited for. And the fact that there's no Thursday night game is a little bit of a bummer for us, I think.
So 4 non-conference games, obviously the 8 ACC games. So Notre Dame, obviously they have kind of dipped their toe in the ACC pond, and that's another subject. But they play the 5 ACC games. So Virginia Tech got them last year at Lane Stadium, this year on the road. Old Dominion, Furman, and Rhode Island. Yes, of course. How can I forget the Rhode Island offer? Um, I just don't think if you're Virginia Tech, you schedule 3 of those games. That seems a bit heavy, or a little bit light, I should say.
Right. Well, and I think that that goes back to what we talked about just a couple of minutes ago, Mark, where, the fan base maybe looks at themselves as maybe somewhere closer to the blue blood. But if you start to schedule like that, if you start to throw like, for example, I don't know, an Iowa or a little bit more of a powerful team, a Washington or a Washington State on your schedule, does that trip you up? And are you looking at a potential loss there? Where, I mean, let's face it, Old Dominion, Furman, and Rhode Island, those should be easy W's for the Hokies. So I don't know. I agree with you. Scheduling is what it is, and I know that people like Whit Babcock are working 15 years out trying to get some of these games scheduled, and then you were supposed to have Michigan in 2021 and 2022. Michigan backs out of that deal, so now you're left scrambling, and I think that that's how you end up with like a Rhode Island in there, because you got to give them a game at home in order to get them to. And it's just, I know it's convoluted, but it is, from a fan perspective, it does get a little frustrating when you don't see something bigger than Furman on your schedule, on your home slate.
Yeah, it's much more difficult than I let it on to be. It's easy for me to sit here and take shots at the schedule, but